Hi everybody, welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. So on my spreadsheets, I have one that's called Prophets Talks. And this part right here is specifically for President Nelson. And I track things like the length of his talk because in the past, he has given significance to the length of his message. And we've seen some interesting patterns. The number of times he talks in General Conference, in this case, just once. The number of temples, which this is what I expected because after announcing 15 temples this last General Conference, that made a total of 200 that he's announced since he became president of the church. And I'm going to have to wait until it comes out on the church website to find out how long the talk was. I'm not going to go through and manually find it. I'd prefer to go according to whatever ends up on the church website. So we'll have that probably in a few days. But there are a couple interesting things already to talk about. One of those things, it's not going to end up on this spreadsheet, but I got a text from my friend Tyler Cragen. He said, "More sevens with President Nelson. The song ended and his talk began at the 7-hour mark on YouTube's live stream." And then he has it right there. That's crazy. I am probably going to have to take note of that and put it somewhere. Maybe I'll have like a special place for it on this spreadsheet that we're looking at, but right at the 7-hour mark, that's weird. Okay. So we had that. Thank you, Tyler. By the way, he has a YouTube channel called The Greatest Cause. He's kind of stepped away from it because of work, but he's working on a Second Coming documentary. Not anytime too soon, but I'll keep you informed about that and let you know once he puts that out. But anyway, he may come back to his channel, so if you don't mind, please make sure to subscribe to him. It's interesting because right now he has 777 subscribers. So, oh my gosh, just everything every day is just so weird. Okay, so we got that. Now, I want to talk about the Spanish Fork, Utah Temple. We've already noted up until this point that President Nelson, he announced this one temple, the Ephraim Utah Temple, in between general conferences. And it's the only one during President Nelson's presidency that has not been announced during a general conference. It turns out that temple was the 70th that he had announced during his presidency. I did a whole video about it, which is worth watching, by the way. If you missed it, you'd probably want to watch this video. But let me just read one of my new quotes that I found as I was preparing that video as we start to think about the Spanish Fork, Utah Temple. The reason why the Spanish Fork, Utah Temple stood out is because it was the last one that he named. And there's already been a number of times where where there's a special temple, say the Rome, Italy temple, that's announced, and it's the last one in the list. It's like the more significant location. All temples are equal in terms of the covenants and ordinances. So no temple is special when it comes to that, but there are special locations to the church. And I was wondering, does Spanish Fork, Utah have some kind of significance in church history? There wasn't any that I knew about until I started looking into it for this video and researching it. So let's go back to this with the Ephraim Utah Temple to kind of set the stage. You can find this on the Church Newsroom YouTube channel. It's a video called Ephraim Utah Temple Groundbreaking Full Ceremony, and it's at the 22-minute and 14-second mark. I'm not going to read this first paragraph. I'm going to read this one here. So this is President Nelson, and he says, "We are here today because of a recent event shortly after the April 2021 General Conference. I received very clear instruction that the Manti Utah Temple should be preserved and that a temple should be built in Ephraim, Utah. we've noticed so many times that President Nelson has received specific instructions. I mentioned before that the length of his messages, we have one example in the Give Thanks campaign or message of November of 2020. Both he and Sherry Dew talked about the fact that he was instructed the exact time that it was supposed to be published, the day it was supposed to be published, and the length of the video, all of which went against the conventional wisdom of how you should do things on social media. And it turned out that that message reached the largest number of people that a prophet has ever reached, like in a single message. Okay. And there's been other things. So, and he's said a number of times that he receives specific instruction, and this is one of those times. Okay. So, for some reason, the Ephraim Utah Temple was supposed to be announced in this way, and there was supposed to be an Ephraim Utah Temple, and maybe that went against conventional wisdom. I don't know. But with that in mind, let's start thinking about the Spanish Fork Utah Temple. So the first place I went was Wikipedia, and I came across this paragraph. In 1852, Latter-day Saints founded a settlement called Palmyra, west of the historic center of Spanish Fork. George A. Smith, who was an apostle, supervised the laying out of a town site, including a temple square in that year. This makes me think immediately of places like Far West, where, you know, still to this day, a temple has not been built, but you do have the cornerstones that are there. By the way, I have a playlist for video tours, and I have a video that I recently published where Jenica and I went to Far West, in case you want to see that. But I've never heard of this. It doesn't say anything about like a temple lot or cornerstones or anything like that. But just like Adamonte-Ammon, where Brigham Young had dedicated the temple block, so like I guess that would be kind of like the same as this, a temple square. It seems like something similar happened with the Spanish Fork, or back then, Palmyra. I wanted to verify this. I don't just go off of what Wikipedia says. Sometimes I do for things like earthquakes, and like I don't need to verify every single earthquake. It does a good enough job for our purposes. But when it comes to things like this, I really need to nail it down and go to a primary source. So thankfully, we have that. So this is on BYU's Digital Collections library. And this is Encyclopedic History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, page 631. And let me see, can I zoom in here? Yeah. Okay, so we're looking over here. Apostle George A. Smith, writing of Palmyra, under date of December 26, 1852. Oh, and let me just say, I tried to look up his journal entry. It is on... What happened last night? It is on the church history library website, but sometimes reading through those diaries and journals is basically impossible unless you spend hours trying to decipher the writing. It's hard to read sometimes, and I wasn't going to like scour through that, and so this is good enough. Okay, so he says, quote, "I have sought out the location of the city of Palmyra on the Spanish Fork River, Utah County, and secured the survey of 360 lots containing 100 rods of ground each, a temple square of 13 acres, and 4 school squares of 2.5 acres." And then he goes on to describe the fort, the city. Okay, so a temple square of 13 acres. Now, if you're not familiar with the geography of Utah, Salt Lake and Utah counties or valleys, whatever. So you have Salt Lake up here, and this is the Salt Lake Valley. And then you have Provo down here, and this is Utah County. In south, the Provo, of course, is where BYU is, and the MTC in Provo. If you go south of Provo, you have Spanish Fork, and you can see Palmyra. Now, this is not, from my understanding, this is not the same as the Palmyra that we're talking about. I found this blog. This is jacobbarlow.com. By the way, he has a YouTube channel, and he did a video tour of this Fort Palmyra marker. So I'll put a link for this in the description box below. Also, make sure to subscribe to him. He is active on YouTube, so it is not a dead channel, and it looks like he does good work and makes interesting videos. So on the blog, he says this: Palmyra was founded in 1852 on the banks of the Spanish Fork River. The town soon became absorbed into the city of Spanish Fork. Okay, so there is a Palmyra today, but the Palmyra that we're talking about in 1852 is now part of Spanish Fork. Present-day Palmyra is a later outgrowth of Spanish Fork. Both Palmyras were named after Palmyra, New York, a town prominent in early Mormon history. Of course, that's essentially the site of the Sacred Grove. I thought I had something on here. Okay, in January 1855, the territorial legislature granted Fort Palmyra / Fort St. Luke a city charter, allowing the government to rename the city Spanish Fork. In 1880, many settlers moved back to Palmyra and built a new meeting house that served as a church and a school. I don't think that's why they called it Temple Square. If you know more, let me know. Let me know in the comments. Send me an email, especially if you have documents or anything like that I can share on the channel. But okay, so the site of this marker right here, Fort Palmyra, this is the southwest marker. It is right here. And I didn't bother to figure out how large the settlement would have been. But being that this is the southwest marker, I suppose Temple Square would have been, somewhere like over here. Here you have I-15. And the church does like to construct temples along highways and roads with a lot of traffic. So, for example, you have the Taylorsville, Utah Temple that's off of I-215, and it's very, very visible. So I wouldn't be surprised if the temple is built maybe on the very same spot as that Temple Square. I don't think that the Temple Square itself is a historical site. Otherwise, it probably would have shown up in my research as I've been looking for this, but I don't know. So why would this be significant? Well, let's go over here. This is my spreadsheet called Quotes A through Z. Now we're looking at the row for the Manti Utah Temple. It's currently row 326. And let's read this quote from Warren S. Snow, who was a brigadier general in the Nauvoo Legion. And this is about the this is about the Manti Utah Temple. You can find this in Life of Heber C. Kimball, compiled by Orson F. Whitney, 1888, pages 446 to 447. We're just going to read this red part. President Brigham Young asked Brother Warren S. Snow to go with him to the Temple Hill. Brother Snow says, "We two were alone. President Young took me to the spot where the temple was to stand. We went to the southeast corner, and President Young said, 'Here is the spot where the prophet Moroni stood and dedicated this piece of land for a temple site. And that is the reason why the location is made here, and we can't move it from this spot. And if you and I are the only persons that come here at high noon today, we will dedicate this ground. So it seems that Moroni, for some reason, selected that site. And I doubt that it was arbitrary. We're not privy at this time as to why that location. But once it's dedicated, it cannot be moved. Right? So could something similar have happened with the Spanish Fork, Utah Temple? Is that why that site was chosen back in 1852? Or was it not because Moroni selected that spot for the Spanish Fork, Utah Temple, although he could have? Was it simply because Apostle George A. Smith started that? Maybe that was in the works. Maybe the dedication or the selection of the temple square made it so that that site could not be changed. And sometime in the future, a temple would be built. I haven't gone too far into it, so maybe there's more out there that I don't know about. But let's finish with this. Here's a quote by Elder Glenn L. Rudd, Emeritus General Authority 70. This was a BYU Idaho devotional, March 11th, 2003. The name of the talk is The Angel Moroni. Moroni had the great privilege as he walked across the American continent of finding a place and designating the place where the St. George Temple was to be built. He also designated where the Manti Temple was to be. And it's been written that he designated Kirtland and Nauvoo and probably others. Moroni appeared to the prophet Joseph Smith 22 different times during the life of the prophet Joseph that we know of. So I know that there's all sorts of theories out there when it comes to like temple locations. You have these like different schools of thought about Book of Mormon geography. I'm kind of neutral when it comes to that. I can't really, at this point in my life, I don't really care about that debate. But I wouldn't be surprised if some of these places were significant locations in Nephite, in Lamanite history. Maybe even during the time of Ether, the book of Ether, the Jaredites. Who knows? What if some of these locations were places where the Jaredites had sacred spots or temples? I don't know. Did they ever have temples? I'd have to go back and read the book of Ether. I can't remember. Could it have to do with sacred sites? Could it have to do with these are just like optimal locations for building cities, and it's just a convenient place? And that was revealed to Moroni in the past that, it's hard for you to imagine, but someday in the future, this is actually an optimal place, geographically speaking. I don't know. The earth is going to change after the second coming. The continents are going to come together. The mountains are going to be made low. The valleys are going to be raised up. So maybe once that happens, we're going to look at all these temples and it's going to be like, holy cow, these are placed perfectly. It could be something like that. So I hope I find out more about the Spanish Fork, Utah Temple. I remember, I think it was in the last conference, the last temple that was announced was the Price, Utah Temple. Maybe there's something special about Price, Utah, just like something like what we found out with Spanish Fork. But it's interesting stuff. What else is there? Okay, well, that's it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.